Welcome at last to part 3 of oral language. In this part, we will focus on the development of oral language and important milestones that each child should reach in their early years, and instructional practices for the classroom. Although our language is very complex, there are definitely advantages and disadvantages to the English alphabetic system. But that system may differ even between two very similar English-speaking countries. There may be differences in pronunciations, spellings, and terminology. For example, my sister-in-law is from England, and she pronounces vitamins as vitamins, and aluminum is aluminium. Since our language is so complex, think about these implications. We are hardwired, in a sense, to develop language in our early years. We've seen also that a child's environment can impact vocabulary and language development. On the next 3 slides, we will find general milestones for language development that takes place from birth to age 5. From birth to 5 months, the child turns his head toward sound, he makes noises when spoken to, he begins to respond to familiar voices and sounds. At 6 to 11 months, he babbles, tries to repeat your sounds, he begins to understand the meaning of words. At 12 to 17 months, he answers simple questions non-verbally. He follows simple directions with gestures, and points and says 2 to 3 words to label objects. At 18 to 23 months, he follows simple commands without gestures, says 10 or more words, and begins to combine them. More milk. At 2 to 3 years, he speaks about 40 words at 24 months. He understands about 300 words and understands some spatial concepts such as on and in, or descriptive words big and happy, and pronouns you and me. He begins to use plurals and regular past tense verbs, and is speaking in 2 to 3 word phrases. At 3 to 4 years, he uses most speech sounds, though some, like the L, the R, and the TH, may be distorted. He groups objects such as food and clothes, he expresses feelings and ideas, and he recognizes language absurdities such as, "Is that an elephant on your head?" He speaks 200 words clearly and understands about 900 words. At 4 to 5 years, speech is largely understandable, and he speaks in sentences of 4 to 5 words in length. He describes how to do things, he answers why questions, he lists items in a category such as animals, and he understands 1,500 to 2,000 words. At 5 years, he engages in conversation. He uses complex sentences of 5 to 8 words in length. He carries out a series of 3 directions, and he uses imagination to create stories, and he understands 2,500 to 2,800 words, and he speaks 1,200 to 2,000 words. Oral language basically has these 4 components. We've talked about the first 3 previously as part of the organization of language, but the 4th, for oral language, is very logical. A child needs to make what he says work in different environments, so this often means that he has to evaluate the setting and pull up the language or what to say that best fits that setting in order to communicate clearly. How he converses at home might be different from the language he uses at school, or that he uses with his classmates or playmates. As every parent knows when they reflect on each of their children's development, children progress and develop at different rates. This is normal, but the important thing is to be on the lookout for warning signs such as those mentioned on the slide. The guidelines for encouraging oral language development are endless, but here are just a few. Think about the amount of specific language, for example, that goes into a simple game of I Spy. Playing I Spy in the kitchen might sound something like this. I spy something that is shaped like a box, that has a door that opens, that bakes food like cakes and cookies, and cooks food like roasts and casseroles, and has dials to control the temperature. What am I? Books offer a wealth of opportunities. Of course, they can be read aloud and discussed, but an illustration in a book can become a game, such as Find Me. Depending on the illustration or photograph, find me something that moves, something that is red, something that is soft, etc. Remember, all those nursery rhymes and chants are great for playing with sounds. rhyming words, alliterations, and exploring rhythm. This type of play is essential to developing basic phonological awareness skills. Keep in mind, it is important to catch our children young and help them develop as extensive a vocabulary and language base as possible. Think, Pair, Share is an easy way to get more student talk into the classroom. It lets the children rehearse what they want to say with an elbow buddy and consequently builds their confidence for sharing in a larger group. Because conversing is so automatic, we assume that students know how to conduct themselves in a group, but many times they need guidance in this area with a handful of rules that will make discussion less intimidating for the more reluctant students and give everyone a fair and open forum. Recasting what a child says lets you add or correct information without obstructing the natural flow of communication. It's another form of modeling. The adult repeats what the child says the correct way. For example, if the child says, "The boy are playing," the adult might respond, "Wow, the boy is playing ball." Or if the child says, "I want to read," the adult might say, "Oh, you want to read." The recast occurs when the adult modifies a learner's statement by adding a new or different grammar, syntactic, or word meaning information, semantic. You can recast often, just emphasize the change with loudness and a pause. The child doesn't need to repeat what you have said, although the child might do so automatically, but repetition is not required. In reference to ELL students, please do not forget to refer to the stages of second language acquisition on page 44 of your Gunning text. It lists characteristics of ELL students at different stages of developing their understanding and use of English, and gives teaching suggestions for each stage. Keep in mind that you may need to modify your own language for the ELL student so that what you say is more comprehensible for the student. Small adjustments such as speaking more slowly, emphasizing the pronunciation of important words, using shorter and simpler sentences with less challenging vocabulary can make an important difference. Using pictures when appropriate, gestures, and modeling can also help to make English more accessible. Many of these strategies are not only helpful for ELL students, but are just good teaching practices for all students as you strive to build a literacy and learning community in your classroom. Last but not least, writing can often be the most challenging task. It seems that being able to discuss and verbally rehearse what a student knows about a topic or what he wants to say helps the student become more familiar with the language he needs to use to express that information or opinion. Doing this first on an oral basis often makes it easier to then transfer to a written task. This is usually true not only for ELL students, but is helpful for other students as well.